Good morning, everybody. This is May 29th, 2020. We're on episode 41 of Transmission, and today we're talking about faith-based organizing.
Or at least that's the cover.
We're going to talk about more than that. That's kind of that's the catch-all. We're going to talk about anything and everything. For those who don't know us, I'll just introduce ourselves. I'm Mark Van Steenwyk. I'm the director for the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. Yeah, and we're very excited. We have a guest, another guest from the left coast. So my friend and colleague, the Reverend Shalom Agtarap, and he's a Methodist pastor out in the Tacoma, Seattle area. So welcome. Thanks a lot for coming on. Of course, you have to get up a little earlier than we do to do this.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Of course, here in Minneapolis, we're not really sleeping anymore at all. So
no.
It's kind of different. But yeah, so Shalom, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and say a bit about what you do and have done, and then we'll just kind of go from there. And as always, our legion of fans can start commenting whenever you want.
Yeah.
So
thanks. Good to be with you this morning. Shalom, she, her pronouns. We're getting to that beautiful part of the year in the Northwest where the sun's up at 5 and the sun's down at 9. So yeah, love it. Not a problem at all. I've been in Tacoma for less than a year. I was asked to start a multicultural hub out of a pretty staid and traditional United Methodist church. And so for anybody who's mainline church raised, you probably know the markers of that. Pretty low formation and discipleship, pretty small imagination around the role of the church in building the common good. And then just decreased capacity, right? Like a pretty huge building that doesn't severely underutilized. And Tacoma is great. I was raised. A lot of my high school, college years were in Seattle, and so to discover another part of the region is really great. And we just bought this house that I'm in 3 weeks ago, and so to really kind of settle into place and to listen. The first 6 months were really intentionally a listening session. Listening season here in Tacoma, and then we're like, well, if we're going to invest, let's invest. And then the pandemic hit, and we tried to sell and buy a house. I'm just really grateful that we found one in the area where our kids can still walk around and scooter, and we're just 2 miles from downtown Tacoma. Previously, though, I was doing work in supporting church planters and folks who are developing new expressions of ministry, ecumenical ministry, and really got permission to do that through faith-based organizing, really a lens of what does it look like to join what the Spirit's doing in place. I've found that planters and developers have so many good ideas. Like, you don't need to throw more ideas at them. They're just like, they're brimming with great ideas, but they're not always brimming with deep relationships and trust and capital like that whenever they start something. So yeah, really exploring that with a mostly, at the time, not anymore, but a mostly white base who understood the politics of things, who understood the importance of poetry and the importance of imagination and worship. But I think still lacked a lot of the formation that's needed to build trust when it doesn't have anything to do with the church building or membership. What do you stand on? So using a lot of that to try kind of an experiment in decolonization is what I've been calling my first year here in Tacoma. And it's an experiment.
It's an experiment. Well, right. And so you've used the word formation a couple times. And of course, that's how you and I met, was working with the Academy for Spiritual Formation. And so, that lens of contemplative life and practice is certainly important thing for you as well. And I know you were actually just wrapping up leading a 2-year academy when the pandemic hit, right?
Yeah, our last
And
week. Yeah.
your last retreat wasn't able to happen because of that. So maybe one of the things we were talking about before we went live was that it would actually be very interesting for Mark and I to have a view of what's going on in Minneapolis from far away, because we are so incredibly immersed in it. I went out and about to do my little live reporting this morning, and I come back and my clothes smell like fire, and we're just in the midst of all this stuff. And so what is this looking like from the outside? And then particularly maybe how does that connect to your little experiment?
Oh, that's good. Yeah. I realized how many like you two and then UCC colleagues and UMC colleagues, like all of a sudden I'm reminded of just the locale of like where people are located and how many folks are doing the same walk, reporting on their own walkabouts kind of throughout Minneapolis. And that's just really, so one, my prayers are directed there because I have relationships there, right? So my friendships and all that kind of draw my attention towards you all. But when to see images of the police station engulfed in flames, and then just the day before, yesterday morning, I think, Daniel, you were also on a walk, and you were like, don't believe the media hype, like, and both of you have said, like, buildings can be replaced. And what would have happened had these 4 officers been arrested and arraigned and, all that. And so, at least in my part of the world, how the conversation has shifted around who looted first, like really what it is. I know we love Target too, but I don't know that we have the same kind of tie to Target. And so it's fascinating. It's been fascinating from that end to feel like there's a little bit of a needle tick toward, police brutality begets this violent uprising. And I don't know that it's ever felt this, or recently at least hasn't felt this clear. Okay. You're always going to have people who are like, they're good cops too. This isn't like, and then like, I feel like everybody and their mama quoting MLK and the riot.
Oh God, yes.
Right.
Everyone becomes an MLK scholar in times like these. It's astonishing. Well, and then I had my idea, Mark. You didn't reply to this when I texted this to you the other day. A couple of episodes ago, we were talking about those old record albums that you could buy and you'd send in, $3.99 and you'd get a record album, and then you'd like be committed to subscribing. And they were always sort of these one-hit wonders. There was always a greatest hits record album, that would have all. And I was thinking, we need to have one of those albums that's like a Martin Luther King greatest hits, one-hit wonders, like MLK quotes taken out of context that we now know and love.
Right.
I mean, I think that'd be a great challenge for musicians, is to come up with, things white people say about MLK as the title for each of their songs, and then use that as inspiration to create an album for white liberals everywhere.
You too can have your own.
Yes, you can use twist nonviolence to justify your moderate passivity.
There's a T-shirt.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a T-shirt right there. That's great.
Here's one of the quotes we need more quotes like this. Riots are the voice of the unheard. I'm seeing this one thrown out, and that actually is a more appropriate use of the wisdom of MLK, because he wasn't just about throwing everyone under the bus times like this.
Yeah. So I guess I feel like with the last few days, from afar, it's felt like, oh, are we are we a little more nuanced now? Are we actually paying attention to some of the roots? Yeah, that's what it looks like from over here.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think that, and I was talking with Pastor Gregory, who was we had on the show early on, talking to him this morning, and about this kind of exact issue, and talking about how, at this point, particularly with the whole videoing thing, right, that the number of examples are so many, and they come one after another after another. It's like, even if you disagree, you're almost being sort of pressed into silence, because you know what an idiot you're going to sound like if you say, "Oh, the police don't do this," and so yeah, it almost does feel like maybe that needle is starting to move a little bit. Hard to know, but.
I'm going to pull up another comment here. And so for those watching, comments are great. Earlier is better, because we've had the bombardment at 29 minutes, and it's hard to feel bad about cutting it off. This is from Kathleen. It's like the mass shootings. We feel outraged for a while, and then we move on to the next thing. The system doesn't change. I guess I'm pessimistic.
Mm-hmm.
One question I have, you've worked with equipping church planters, and that work, to me, from a faith-based organizing lens, to me, it seems like this is a moment where the church can kind of have a prophetic and hopeful voice.
Mm-hmm.
When these things go on, like, I'm not too much of a Calvinist, but it's hard for me not to see some hand involved in, it's Pentecost and Minneapolis police department is burning. There's too much of a fiery possibility of change going on there. But now, like, wondering, what does it mean to be the church in a time like this? Not only just the pandemic, but now a time of potentially seismic change one way or the other in our society. Like,
yeah.
What's the role of the church in this, and how do we think about our task right now? I know that's a big theological question, but I'm not really seeing things beyond just the usual responses to that question.
Dan brought up the word formation. I think the thing lacking is that we don't know, we don't know our own history. We don't know how, the police state came to be. We don't know how city governments work. We don't know how many of our city governments contract out to faith-based or other, nonprofits to do the work of caring for citizens. And so then when citizens aren't cared for, you're like, oh, I can't go up against a nonprofit, or I can't malign this other church ministry. Never mind that it has no semblance of the marks of Christ, on it, or Christ caring for the margins. So I think it's that, my spouse teaches labor history, teaches history in high school. And one of the first things we did in our little decolonizing experiment was to teach folks about whiteness. Like, this is how you came to be white, and this is how you came to profit from being white. And then when you have a congregation of 92% white folks, this is how we are formed to act. So let's just investigate that. Yes. And that felt like the spirit was really present. One, because there was this, one or two were defensive, but because of the way that it was presented, because of the way that my spouse did it, and the way that folks were able to really kind of say, like, I'm not free. I feel fear all the time. I'm not free to imagine. I'm not free to be curious, all these things. So actually this way that whiteness has been packaged and sold to me, I'm not benefiting from. So I think part of it is like history. He developed this, this case study simulation thing of really kind of the draft riots in New York, and everybody takes a part and studies it. So here we are in the sanctuary, and we're reading about the draft riots, and it's brilliant. It's this detached enough thing where people who don't use their brains in that way on a Sunday morning were asked to kind of say, can we look at this third thing. It's not scripture. It's not your own personal experience. Something that happened in American history. And then can we start to see how the media was at work? There was a war raging on that needed more participants in this war. Capitalist interests. Where does anti-immigrant sentiment come from? And I think that kind of work is what is touches multidisciplinary enough, intersectional enough that people of a lot of different class backgrounds, education levels can enter into it. Because I don't, you're right, we just over spiritualize things. Otherwise, we're prone to do that. And then we don't, just like Kathleen said, we don't get to the root of why we're looking at the same dang thing. And I love how even the misogyny of like, we still have Ahmaud Arbery's name in our head. And of course we have George Floyd's name in our head, but Breonna has just kind of, our imagination and energy isn't there right now, or at least for many. Right. And so the misogyny that's present there, and we need I think we need to be able to unearth some of that when there's not a death right there. Mm-hmm. And so we started that kind of whiteness work, exploring white supremacy and how central it's been to the formation of so many congregations. I got there in July. We did in September. Like that's the work, right? And then now I get to agitate my congregation by saying, wow, good thing we like started looking at the roots of white supremacy. Like, when we got together, good thing we were talking about bias and intercultural, communication. Good thing we're doing all that stuff so we can handle how heavy this is.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, this is one of the tragedies of the modern church in a lot of ways is, to me, if there's a place that should be about the work of looking at the myths that captivate our imagination so that we can see the world differently through compassion and a longing for justice, that's what church is, should be. And it doesn't happen nearly enough. I don't think of churches as places of discernment in a time when we really need it. We get a lot of comments coming in.
Rolling in. Yay.
Yeah. And so Colin writes, I've been posting far and wide the Baldwin quote that I posted and read yesterday. It's the who is looting whom, which you brought that up. Like we act as though like part of the white imagination is to think that things were normal before in a good way. And so this antagonizing question, like, hey, you think there's looting now? There's been looting going on and you just didn't even notice it because you're white and middle class or whatever.
Yeah.
This reframing of violence, not as just the new thing you're seeing, but the thing that's been there and invisibilized. And
you had a police state to help you protect whatever was looted and then brought into your community, right? Like, yeah. I mentioned, yeah, absolutely. And all the way back, right? So like I come from Filipino immigrants who came to the States in the early 80s. And I also bring with me this lens of like a 500, the quip is, 500 years in Spain, 50 years in Hollywood. Like the Philippines has been this place where Chinese traders were there early on doing that thing, very early influence from Islam from Malaysia and Indonesia going over. But really like Spain did us in, and then America did us in, and we were and we're still seen as these little protectorates, little in such a diminutive sense, but also that this idea of looting from all sides now, and with the rise of capitalism in the last 100 years, like that's just continued to rape the land, the women. I mean, sex trafficking is ridiculous in the Philippines and throughout Southeast Asia. So like the looting is very present in my imagination. It's the only one born in the States from my family that has a really, really strong tie to the language and the people and the place in the Philippines. So yeah, looting is not not just a white thing. And yet, like, is so, just like you said, this is how white supremacy functions. Like, it's normal. This is normal. So anything that pushes against that, or even just asks the question, you're out of line. And let's put you back in line with the help of this police state and all the other, policies that go in place.
Comment from Heather: is smothering the ruach wind spirit the unforgivable sin? I mean, that's what Jesus says. What that looks like in this moment, I guess, is open to interpretation, but I have my opinions. This sort of like, the spirit can't be involved in any of this. Let's go back to the way things were. To me, at least, is a shame if we get stuck in that way of thinking.
Yeah, and this whole thing, right? So there's the police state. There's all of the issues of force, right? That keeps things in line. But then there's also the social, emotional manipulation things. This whole thing about, let's just be nice and polite, right? And I think about that in relation to the spirit, right? So the spirit was chaotic. This wasn't nice and polite. These guys are all just babbling, and they all think they're wasted, right? At 10 o'clock in the morning. And and so that smothering, I mean, politeness is such a smothering thing and activity, right? And and I think about that group of Black women that went on that train to Napa and got arrested for being loud.
Having a good time.
Yeah.
Well, that's what so many social commentators are Black African American folks who are posting on social media have said for a long time. Like, this is the current iteration of Jim Crow, is that you're not allowed to experience the full range of human emotion. Not in public.
Right.
And how we control that, and how we manipulate that, and just cast that with such suspicion, it is amazing to me. And when we don't, to your point, Mark, when we don't unearth that in a space of discernment in the church as a congregation, when we don't weed out the idolatry of niceness, then you don't have energy, you don't have imagination, you don't have courage to do the work and to call it out when you see it. And I'm saying that as a pastor who has loved and accompanied so many white women and their feelings, and when you sit with them, not as spiritual director, but just as a listening presence, what they share was like they were denied so many opportunities to speak freely. They were also held to these really rigid standards of performing a certain way, whether it's their fathers or their spouses or their brother or whatever the institution was, right? And so, like, none of us are free if niceness is the standard, and none of us are like advancing toward that unleashing of the Holy Spirit, where, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. That's not going to happen being nice. You won't even get to the other part of Jerusalem, if that's your metric.
Let's keep rolling the comments.
Here's a couple referring to 1960 with Floyd's death on top of COVID. Instead of Vietnam, it feels like 1968 all over again. I was 14. MLK preached nonviolent resistance, but they killed him before that it was achieved. And also, just another 1968 comment. Watching what is going on in Minneapolis reminds me of the riots in Chicago in 1968. I didn't witness the riots firsthand, but I witnessed the years of the aftermath, the decades of empty lots, the lack of local business stores, bars on all the doors and windows, white flight, the lack of banks, the high cost of debt, the increase of poverty, drugs, and other addictions. The places were wastelands still 50 years later. I mean, I think it's interesting, this comparison with 1968, which I was not alive, but I know it was a watershed year of convergence of all kinds of issues coming at one point. And I've talked to a lot of people who really believed something important was going to happen. There's going to be revolution, and it didn't really happen. And so there's a lot of disappointment after that. I hope it's not like that now, but odds are against us.
Yeah, I could say a lot about that, but let's keep rolling the comments.
Yeah, that's good. Probably wise.
As the one old guy in the room, I could.
Thank you, Elder. Jill writes, quoting Romero, I beg, implore, I beg you, I order you in the name of God, stop the repression.
Yeah.
That's the gospel.
Yep.
Right there.
Amen.
Call to repentance. Colin writes, this could be a big question. Would love your thoughts. The future of the church of any denomination must become communities of active decolonization, or they will cease to be the church. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so the way that I would answer that is that they've already ceased to be the church. I mean, they may be an organization, they may be a nonprofit organization, but they've already ceased to be the church, and so, right. So to me, it's about, what are the communities that are going to discover how to be the church? And they can call themselves whatever they want, but yeah, unless they're involved in doing this formational work. And Shalom, I love the way you were saying, like, isn't this good that we did this when times weren't bad, right? And that reminds me so much about the issue of the spiritual life, right? People suddenly want to meditate when they're in crisis. And it's like, that's not when you start meditating.
Yeah,
right? That's not going to work because you're in crisis, right? But you have to start as, this is the basic foundation of my life. And then when crisis happens, it's like, then you've got a lot of good resources, right? Yeah. But yeah, if you're just living the unexamined life when things are fine, and then things are in crisis, and you're like, oh, better do some formation. Yeah. Like, no, you're just going to fall back on your habitual patterns within the world of stress that you're then in.
Well, just the commodification of meditation, contemplative silence.
Yes.
I got my amen corner. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
But that was really hard for me. I did, when you and I met, I was probably in my mid-20s when I started the 2-year Academy for Spiritual Formation. And for a lot of reasons, probably I was too young for that. Like, I didn't have enough life. So every breakup, right? This is what I brought to my quiet time. Every breakup, I was like, oh God, I just wish I could practice centering prayer right now. That was not the time. Right? My like mid-20s, angst, not the time. That's what I'm trying to say to folks now is like that. You need that for the endurance. Like, you need to be able to hang on to something non-judgmentally and to hold it. Like, you need to be able to see all these comments about white women, and because you've had this spiritual muscle build up, you haven't let it atrophy, it's active, like, you can hold that without feeling persecuted.
Right. Yes. That's so good. Yeah.
Speaking of this commodification, to me, I like going off on this. To me, it feels like commodification of spirituality feels like a type of disassociation personally. And then, Ceres writes, a lot of churches are very disassociated culturally, structurally, and psychologically from their communities. Getting faith communities out of their silos is a challenging task. I mean, I feel like a lot of the responses I'm hearing, there's been a lot of receptive people saying, what's going on? What can we do? I want to be engaged. But I see a lot of people just knee-jerk reacting from a place of crisis in a way that is actually stifling dissent in horrific ways from people that I would have thought of as very progressive people, because they're acting out of their anxiety and fear. They don't have a way of staying grounded in the midst of this. And I see that individually, I see that happening with the church. Like, the church, when these things come up, they're not practiced in engagement and discernment. And so they just sit there like having no clue about what it means to be present.
Yeah.
And it seems like what Ceres is talking about. And I long for the church to be more engaged in helpful ways than that.
I would just say, in my time of walking alongside planters, and really anybody who's wanting to become activated and moving from head to heart, this is the dichotomy between activist and organizer, right? Like, what is I got to do something, I got to show up in the streets, and what is the long-term understanding of the roots, understanding of the communities, honoring elders who've been at this work for a long time, and then saying, like, what's the possibility now? Or as like as Elaine Heath would say, what's the energy that's coming toward us now, right? Like these discernment questions. And so often, not to play into the binary, but yeah, it becomes this is how activist culture works, and it's quick to burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the longer term relationships and practices that'll keep us organizing, so that even if disappointment comes after this initial thing, even as Brianna's name is like forgotten, we continue to work for an end to police brutality. We continue to end for, like watch out for anti-Blackness wherever it pops up its head. So I found that too. A lot of folks who want to be engaged with their faith go for the activist route rather than like long-term organizing.
Yeah, the work of rootedness and being present.
Yeah.
Couple more comments, and we're past time, so we'll make this quick. We don't. But this one's this is my favorite comment so far. My moment this week was when we white Christians got schooled by Christian Cooper's call that folks stop targeting Central Park Karen. WWJD bracelets exploded off so many white wristbands, I'm sure. Yeah, and to me, the thing is like it's easy to scapegoat. My wife, whose name is Amy, is upset that this woman in Central Park is named Amy. She's like afraid that Amy will be the new Karen or the new Becky, and that Amy is a perfect name to replace those. So I feel bad for her, but there is
I do too.
But focusing on this woman instead of it's in these situations, we want to focus on the 4 cops rather than the system. We want to focus on Amy rather than this pathological tendency of white people to scapegoat Black people for problem. Like this is one of those moments again. If we're anchored in our way of understanding the story, we can respond with our eyes open instead of reacting to these individual actors.
Amen.
Yeah, I just want to throw up this comment of Heather's here, and again, thank you for all these great comments. Because
is this Heather? This one right here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So West Virginians know about being looted, right? And so for those of you who don't know, Heather Murray Elkins is just retired, amazing professor of worship at Drew and a Methodist elder. And I had the great blessing of being able to go with her to her class in immersion in West Virginia. And that was a lot of what the focus was, right? It was just that, West Virginia is kind of this extraction state that has been looted of all the resources, all the land, all the people. And that's just been a nonstop looting that everybody says is good because it's capitalism. That's fun. So,
yay,
all right. Well, Shalom, thank you so much for coming on. Just so many wonderful things that you've said. It's been really, really good. And for everybody, thanks for watching. Thanks for your comments. And we will be back on Monday with who exactly knows what.
Over the weekend, what's coming on Monday? It'll be good, I'm sure.
Yeah, it will be. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye, everybody.
Bye.